Hello and welcome back to the Effective Media Show. I'm your host Henry, and today we're going to be talking about dark matter. For starters, dark matter was initially released as a book by Blake Crouch. After roughly 7 years of a growing fan base and multiple award nominations, the book would eventually be picked up by Apple TV and adapted. While I can't speak directly on the book, Season 1 of Dark Matter tackles ideas of the self, consciousness, multiple worlds interpretation, quantum mechanics at a base level, inter-character drama, all wrapped up in a nice sci-fi setting that's pretty familiar to us. The world itself isn't the science fiction aspect of the show. The real science fiction is being able to travel in between the many worlds. When I say many worlds, I'm basically referring to the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. Without getting too bogged down in the details of it all, because there'll be plenty of time for that later, trust me. Many worlds interpretation simply insists that if you are faced with a choice and you choose one thing over another, you inhabit the world that you made your choice in. However, another world is created where you chose the other thing. And put simply, this is the vehicle that all the plot happens with in the show. For now, I think we're good to start the review proper. If anything else comes up during the show, which it will, trust me, we'll unpack it as we go because a lot of the conceptual things or the sci-fi quantum mechanic kind of things happen in such a way that usually whatever the effect that is being represented or portrayed by that specific law or action, or however we want to put it, it's usually a direct reflection of the characters. So yeah, if we tried to unpack and define terms and do all that right from the jump like we did in The Expanse, we simply would just never get to the show because there's plenty that you can talk about with this show, believe me. Okay, so we're moving into episode 1 titled, Are You Happy in Your Life? Already just... what a way to start out, right? I don't know if this speaks more on me than it does any truth of the matter, but for me, that just feels like a very poignant question, you know? I can't recall the last time someone genuinely tried to ask me this. So maybe I really just don't want to remember, but it just feels so inflammatory, you know? I mean, maybe it's not even that the verbiage is particularly striking. I think it's just the fact that it's so blunt and honest in its approach. Anyways, back to the episode. The episode starts with us following our main character, our protagonist, Jason Dessen, throughout his morning routine. In doing so, we find out that he's married and he has a child. His son is about 16, 17, as he's just now getting his license. While the start of the episode might seem very mundane and grounded in normalcy, as we'll find out later on in the series, that's really the whole point. In exchange for his typical, quiet, normal life, Jason and Daniela had to sacrifice a large part of who they were, fundamentally, what some philosophers would call their essence. This is a reoccurring theme and driver for the plot at large. So as the episode continues moving forward, we just follow Jason through the rest of his day. Jason lets Charlie, his son, drive himself to school while he rides shotgun, and Jason eventually ends up at his place of work, the University of Chicago campus. That's right, our protagonist is actually smart. Had you going there with this whole, normal American life. This dude is college educated. Just kidding. I know. You can see, however, on Jason's face, his mannerisms, the whole point of the episode is to show how mundane and routine things are for him. Which is fair, you know, that's the regular baseline setting for most people. You move through life in such a way as to create the least amount of friction as possible. There is nothing wrong with living this way. It's how I live personally. There's certain things that I do move towards with passion, but to assert otherwise, you would immediately be getting into a philosophical miasma that you just can't fruitfully escape from. Self-examination is good. And the episode up to this point has basically just been showing that Jason is not doing any self-examination. At least not until he gets a certain email. After Jason concludes his lecture, he checks his email, and he notices one of his good college friends, a guy named Ryan, just got awarded, like, what is some equivalent to a Nobel Peace Prize or something. And you could tell by the way it affected him that it's getting the ball rolling on some self-reflection, perhaps maybe not in the healthiest way or under the healthiest lens of examination. So now Jason has a choice to make. Attend your friend's celebration or be bitter and don't. And Jason wouldn't have gone either. It's only after Daniela finds out about it that she tells him basically to stop moping around and suck it up and go. In a tender, feminine, nice wife kind of way, though. Jason ends up attending, and he's having a good time. He's catching up with his buddy Ryan, who's been busy doing NDA crazy secret material science stuff. And Ryan is trying to recruit him for his new company that he's starting with all the grant money he's getting. And Jason is not interested in the offer. He does consider it, for however brief a moment it is, he gives it genuine consideration. The conclusion he comes to is that he enjoys his life in Chicago far too much to go anywhere else, regardless of how materially well off they're going to be. So let's just take some time to really appreciate what this says about his character. Obviously, this demonstrates he is a family man. But what I find more interesting than just that at its face value is that he became a family man through his actions, not necessarily his intentions. It's revealed to us later on in the series that Jason and Daniela were just kind of like a passing fling, but they ended up having Charlie out of wedlock. Moreover, they both sacrificed all of their potential to have this child that they weren't expecting. Jason gave up being a field researcher, doing like superposition quantum mechanics research or something. And Daniela, his wife, gave up being an artist. And this isn't all just like speculative, unreliable narrator kind of quote potential that they're missing out on. By the time that they're in this predicament with whether or not they should have Charlie, they're both basically considered successful in their fields independently. Daniela and Jason both are very willful, determined people. So for Jason to be able to make this decision so quickly with so much conviction, staring a fat pay raise in the face while he's doing it, while also being invited back into a field that he truly enjoys working in, it just goes to show that this dude really fucking loves his family. Such a great bit of character writing already. Getting back to the plot for a bit, the celebration ends up kind of winding down on its own, the energy's gone, people are leaving, it's just been Ryan and Jason chopping it up for a little bit, and he's for sure buzzing, at least right now. Lucky for him, this is a local bar he could just walk home from. So he gets to warming up them Chevrolegs and gets on his way. While walking home, he basically comes across like a vagrant homeless guy type. And he was going to keep it pushing right past him too. The homeless guy actually had to coerce him a little bit. He had to like work his magic, make him feel empathy for a second, remind him he was a human being. And then Jason got out his wallet like he was going to give him some cash. So, interesting, Jason. Maybe you're not a charitable guy, but I feel more charitable whenever I'm feeling good, so to speak. But anyways, while Jason's busy fumbling with his wallet, trying to get some cash for the dude, homeboy pulls out a fucking gun on his ass, dude. The switch up is crazy, actually. Immediately starts getting on his ass, tells him to get in the car. He's sitting in front of like a blacked out Escalade or something like that, like a black bag van. And of course, any normal person, you would see a homeless guy, like a very obviously homeless guy, sitting on the street by the curb in front of the car. You're not gonna think it's some dude fucking trying to kidnap you. But yeah, Jason starts locking up. He goes along with it because you don't want to get shot. It becomes very clear that he's not interested in your money or your life, that he's just gonna do something nefarious to you. Once Jason's in the vehicle, the guy tells him to just drive to this specific place. He's taking directions from him. He's in the back seat behind Jason with the gun, so it's driving Miss Daisy right now. Eventually, they get to this industrial park, and the guy has Jason drive into an old dilapidated building. This is the part where I would be thinking, this is it. This is how I go. I'm too drunk to defend myself properly. I've already gotten to the secondary location. This guy's got a gun on me. What's he gonna do to me? Nah, not Jason though. Maybe it's shock, who knows, but he's dealing with this pretty well. Eventually, the kidnapper gunman has Jason walking all the way down this building. He just keeps taking him deeper and deeper, staircase after staircase. It's looking real bleak. Like, it's at this point that Jason figures, I gotta do something. So now his mindset is more conducive towards survival. I don't know what he was thinking before or what he was vibing with before, but now he's team surviving. And only a few moments after having this newfound resolve does the gunman start demanding things from Jason. The demands are still crazy, don't get me wrong, but it's not ever demanded in like a creepy kind of a way. It all seems very matter of fact for whoever the kidnapper is. And the fact of the matter is that Jason's got a strip. Yeah, dude, the gunman's basically just like, yeah, if I can take it off, no diddy. So Jason's taking it off, right? He gets to keep his boxers on. Thankfully, he did him that kind of a decency, but it was only whenever he demands the ring off of his finger that Jason just fucking snaps. Jason makes a move for the gun. He starts bashing the dude's arm onto like a rusty pipe or something. He's giving him the work, like he's drawn blood on him. Unfortunately for Jason, he missed too many quick time events, and he ends up getting subdued by the guy. It's only until the mystery kidnapper has administered some kind of drug intravenously into Jason that he reveals who he is. It is also Jason. So by this point, the shock, confusion, and the raw effects of the drug are starting to take hold of Jason's consciousness. While Jason is starting to slip away, he asks him the million-dollar question. Are you happy in your life? You've never thought of all the different decisions you've made, how things could go differently, what it would be like to lead a different life? And Jason answers him honestly with a yes, but that's all he could get out before he passes out. So whenever I first watched this scene, it really had me wondering if it was just the raw vulnerability of that moment, or if it was some deeper resentment that he held towards his family. And all of this gets answered eventually, but to hold on to that feeling in the moment was probably one of the best parts of episode 1 for me personally. And it's the next upcoming scene that really blew the doors off the show for me personally. Whenever I first saw what was happening, I was going through it, dude. So we follow Jason 2, or J2, as he's colloquially known. Within the fandom, at least. No one in the show's called him J2. But yeah, we see J2 going home, and I gotta be honest with you guys, like, it really fucking made me uncomfortable in a way that I didn't realize was possible because I had never even considered something like this even happening before. Evidently, this imposter Jason just wants to take over Jason Prime's life. Immediately upon entering the house, J2 is getting to work. He pulls up on Daniela and fucking he gets to sliding. And she's into it. She thinks that's her husband. She thinks that's the person she married. No, bitch, this is just some guy. It's just so infuriating, and it's like, oh my god, it's so creepy and gross, and it's like obviously a huge betrayal of trust, but she's into it because he's got that fire that she thought left him years ago. Meanwhile, Jason Prime wakes up in this guy's world, but he doesn't wake up in the world directly right from the jump. He wakes up in this giant cube. And I know what you're thinking, oh Henry, isn't that just a room? No, bitch. He steps out of the cube by opening the door to it, and he's within a larger facility. But clearly, whatever he went through to get to this parallel world already fucked him up big time because he takes like a step and then falls down. And I guess the medical team or like the facility crew on the other side were already anticipating this. So they're already pulling up on him with the gurney, and it's like the whole facility seems to be built around like the cube. So it's an interesting right from the jump. You're like, whoa, what the fuck? Eventually, J1 does end up regaining consciousness and is immediately under scrutiny by everybody. They got him talking to a shrink because he's acting weird. Of course he is. He's not the same dude. But don't let them know that, because then they're gonna do something. They're gonna do something to you because you're like you're like an interdimensional refugee. Anyways, during the whole shrink interrogation dilemma he's in, he ends up meeting J2's love interest that he's now having to deal with the consequences of that with. Eventually, it gets to be way too much in a final round of interviews where essentially Velocity, the company that J2 founded, their CEO, another one of his old college friends, Leighton Vance, he's conducting the interview with J1, and Leighton's like, yeah, man, you're being kind of sus. And they have their Among Us moment, and J1 ends up escaping the entire facility a la Jason Bourne, just minus the gun violence. So you've just escaped a parallel world where some people look familiar, but no one is really who they say they are. You're not in your right mind. You're coming down off of some weird experimental drug you've never even knew existed. Let me ask you something. Where is the first place you're going to go? Well, Jason, our Jason, J1, basically just goes back to the house that he owns with Daniela in his universe. Of course, when he gets there, nothing's the same. Even the architecture's different. So, like, it's not a matter of, like, getting pranked or being skeptical in a healthy way. It's that everything is different, but still the same somehow. And what makes it worse is that the shrink he escaped from in Velocity is living there with him and is his main squeeze, but they don't have a defined relationship, I guess. J2 is basically misogynist, is what I'm saying. And that's basically how episode 1 ends. We're left feeling confused, excited, but also betrayed in a weird way. You've been kidnapped by someone who looks like you, but is not you inherently. The only consolation you could possibly get from this is if you tried to reconcile that that is you, but from another universe by looking at it through like an existentialist lens. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I think the review of the next episode is probably going to be the best place to try and dive into the philosophy and understanding of the world in that regard. For now, thematically, I think it's best we kind of sit in the uncomfortability of the situation, similar to how J1 is doing. And so that will take us to episode 2, titled Trip of a Lifetime. The phrase or saying trip of a lifetime isn't usually used a lot in passing conversation, but the saying or expression itself does elicit a lot of emotional response out of people. If someone posited the question to you, what would your trip of a lifetime be? You're put in a position where you have to consider if you've already had a trip of a lifetime or what the ideal trip would even be. And in Jason's case, he's already had what he would consider a trip of a lifetime. Without getting too much into spoilers, because I feel like the character moments need to shine as they're unfolding, what Jason thinks back to and recalls to himself as being one of the best times he's had with his family is when he takes them to Yellowstone or some other American national park. While on the other hand, we can analyze the episode's title being in relation to what's happening in the overarching meta-narrative. Jason 1 is now having to grapple with and understand his place in this new world that Jason 2 inhabited, while Jason 2 is getting his own trip of a lifetime, becoming more familiar and integrating into Jason 1's life and family. If we just take a moment to consider what the real implications would be of being able to teleport or transport yourself to another world, I think no matter how normalized something like that would become, it would never really be diminished how incredibly significant of an achievement that would be. Moving on to the episode analysis proper, the first thing we see is basically J1 losing his goddamn mind. Being a scientist, he wants to go through the proper methodology of determining what is happening to him. This leads Jason to determining that the best way of going about this is to just check himself into a hospital. He goes through the routine battery of scans, he does MRIs, X-rays, CAT scans, the whole 9 yards. After some time, the admitting doctor comes back to him with the results alongside a psychiatrist. The physical medicine doctor basically tells him there's nothing wrong with you. There's no sign of a stroke, there's no brain abnormalities, there's no tumors, you are in working condition. The only thing of note he brings up to J1 is that he had some strange, undocumented psychoactive drug in his bloodstream. And it's this detail that got me really excited about the show because it really does a good job about grounding itself in the sci-fi setting. Just as a quick sidebar, we're going to clear up the differences between psychotropic, psychoactive, and psychedelic drugs. To start off, we'll deal with psychotropic drugs. These drugs, in a nutshell, help regulate the brain, and the nervous system to better achieve a desired functionality within the brain. The standard scientific connotation is just relating to drugs, usually that will treat some kind of mental illness. Meanwhile, on the other hand, psychedelic drugs are known just to affect your perception via hallucination, sensation, things like that. The main difference between the two is that while psychotropic drugs will generally get you to a different mental state, the point of psychedelic drugs are to put you in a consciously noticeable mental state. And that brings us to the happy medium of psychoactive. The term psychoactive is just a catch-all term for any drug that directly inhibits some functionality of the brain. So what this doctor is essentially telling J1 is that, hey, you had this weird compound molecule in your brain, and we don't know what it does, but that thing was rolling around in there. Pretty scary stuff. You just came off the heels of a kidnapping, you're in a world that you don't understand anymore, and now your one trusted axiomatic value of science is basically failing you and telling you, yeah, we don't know what the fuck's going on with you. And as another quick sidebar tangent, I know that defining terms and getting into the weeds of, like, for example, what we just did, talking about the different kinds of drugs and their specific definitions and terminology and how they interact with each other and they create delineation in ideas. There's going to be a lot more of that because while The Expanse is mainly a sci-fi show with some ethical consideration to be taken into account, Dark Matter is really just an examination of the self, and I plan on talking a lot about the philosophy that I was encountering in it and that I thought was important. Okay, tangents aside, we could get back to the episode. After the physical medicine doctor tells him, like, hey man, there's nothing wrong with you, that's when the shrink steps in and is like, hey, well, you know, it could be something with your brain. Like, have you had any stressful things happen to you lately? Do you even know who you are? Like, you're saying you don't know who you are at all, so I've compiled this dossier for you and we could try and jog your memory. And this is whenever we get a majority of the exposition for who J2 is. We get a bit of a glimpse into how J1's reacting to it all. It's a very well done scene, but the gist of it is that we learn that J2 is a world-renowned physicist. He built his own company in Velocity, and is just overall a well-respected pillar in the scientific community. And like I said before, J1 kind of reacts to this in what I would imagine a pretty reasonable way given what he's going through. He at least has the wherewithal to play along with the shrink, so eventually the shrink can see that he's going through a lot of emotional processing and grief, I guess. This drives her to offer him help and treatment in the mental ward. Still maintaining his composure after finding out that his research he would have pursued basically would have paid off and he could have been doing all these great things that most people have some kind of inclination or ideation towards believing in themselves. J1 ultimately plays along knowing that it's his only way to get out of this situation inconspicuously. And once J1 sees the opportunity, he's getting out of the hospital. Like, he's not trying to become institutionalized. This probably wasn't even something he would consider outright. He probably genuinely thought in the moment that there was something wrong with him. Shock and trauma could do a lot to someone. After a bit of cat and mouse with Velocity security agents, while he's escaping the hospital, he does successfully manage to pull the slip on everyone. So after finding out that there's nothing physically wrong with him, and mentally, the only thing that he could really pin the blame on would be this weird psychoactive drug, which could mean fuck all really if you think about it. J1 seeks more stability and understanding in his position in the world and who he might have been as J2 by trying to find Daniela, his wife. After wandering the streets of Chicago, doing some self-reflection, and a stroke of good luck, he does end up finding Daniela. Like I mentioned earlier in the show, Daniela gave up her art career to have a child with Jason. In this world, however, Daniela is just like hot shit when it comes to art. She's become so successful with her art career that she's opening a show at like a mega art center where it's multi-floored and there's multiple different things you could do. Whenever you walk into the show itself, you get handed like a blue book, and it's like a pick your own adventure kind of thing. It's up for this one weekend, but then in a couple weeks it'll be up again. So it's like, you know, she's doing a lot. On first impression alone, with the size of the venue and the amount of people who are there, like well-to-do people with the dress code, it's quite impressive. Danielle is doing very well. Jason does end up finding her in the crowd sometime after just being there and wandering around and trying to fit in. Unfortunately, this is the first time Jason has lost his cool, and it's not it's not the way you want to do it. It's not that he makes a scene or starts crying on the spot or pops off when she doesn't understand him. It's just that he's operating under the assumption that this is his Daniela, not J2's Daniela. He doesn't make too bad of an impression, though, because after a little bit, one of Daniela's friends pulls her away to go deal with like a sponsor or something. Coincidentally, it was at this moment that J2's Ryan ends up coming up to him and they have a weird moment. So you could already tell, like, in J1's universe, in his world, him and Ryan are still boys, even though they get busy with their own lives, and one's winning prizes and starting companies, while the other is just trying to grade papers that the students clearly don't give a shit about. So already we could draw some pretty drastic differences between the two Jasons. J1 is more sociable or family-oriented, more people-oriented, and J2 is obviously just on his supervillain grind to unlock the universe. After J1 is able to salvage this awkward, disjointed greeting and small talk, J1 comes to find out that Ryan and J2 were actually working in tandem on this box project. Ryan was handling the research and development of the psychoactive drug, while J2 was basically doing all of the actual, like, theoretical material science that would go into how the box functions. And without trying to draw any more suspicion, he decides that's really all he's able to get out of it whenever Ryan starts pushing back over, oh, you had me sign an NDA, you told me you'd test me like this, so there's already hints that J1 and J2 are completely different people, aside from having a common origin. Whatever point they branched off with each other on, it already created way more difference than you can imagine. The relationship dynamic that Ryan kind of exudes towards J1, assuming he's J2, paints a pretty good picture about who's in charge and who has, I guess you could say, the superior grounding on their character. Eventually, someone suggests that they get together for an after party at Daniela's apartment. It's just going to be Daniela and Ryan and Jason 1, so this will be his perfect opportunity to really be vulnerable and try and get their help on something that any normal person, even if you are like a theoretical physicist or whatever, would think is just completely absurd. Fast forward, we're at Daniela's apartment, and let me tell you guys, this dialogue is really fucking good. Jason is making super compelling points and arguments. He's also doing the sci-fi trope thing where he reveals more than he could possibly know. It all comes to a head whenever J1 proposes to D2, Daniela 2, right? Like, we gotta delineate it somehow. But anyways, J1 is telling D2 about how they had a family. Like, where I'm from, we have a son, and his name is Charlie. And this is what really blows the doors off of it for Daniela, and ultimately leads to her believing in him, which is fucking crazy, by the way, to think about. Like, I don't know, someone would have to drop insane fucking lore on my head for me to really believe that someone came from another universe. And it all suddenly clicks for Jason. The decision that caused the branching point for J1 and J2 was their decision to have kids together. So for 15 years, J1 and J2 have been slowly drifting apart in every aspect of themselves. So J1 brings us up to R2 and D2, no Star Wars, and Ryan, being the only other, like, scientifically minded person in the conversation, does lend credence to its validity. You know, he says, yeah, that tracks, but I still don't believe you. I'm still being skeptical about this. In the midst of this back and forth between J1 and R2, D2, God, I can't get over the fact that it'll only be for this scene, but it's not, I'm just tired of the Star Wars bullshit. Daniela decides ultimately that she believes him. You know, people tend to live with their regrets, maybe not even their regrets, but people tend to ruminate on their choices. I'm sure if you did something as drastic and finite as deciding to have kids or not have kids, of course it's going to be one of those things that you think about, or even intrudes on your thoughts in a daily basis. Daniela, feeling more comfortable with Jason and fully embracing the possibility that he is in fact from another world. She tells Ryan that it's okay for him to go. Jason can stay here because apparently he's being hunted down by assassins or something. Fast forward a bit, it's time to go to bed, and Daniela's interest has been officially piqued, you know? I think it's this point in the episode that she also reveals that J2 came to her recently, like a couple weeks ago, when I imagine the box project was entering its final stages, that J2 basically told D2 that he regrets never having kids with her. And that's really what seals the deal for J1. Then J1 and D2 have a bit of a tender moment. They're getting real intimate because there's that weird thing where it's like, this person looks like your person, but they're very obviously not. And that only leads to further attraction and infatuation too, because it's like, yeah, you look like my partner, but you are a different person. So it adds that freshness to it. I don't know, man. Like, it had me feeling some type of way. I was worried for my boy, dude. I didn't want him to cheat on D1, you know, but they do end up kissing a little bit. But ultimately, J1 is like, no, this isn't right. Like, he doesn't give any moral or ethical grounds for it. He just feels that it's wrong. So the moment passes and they both cool off. She gets out of bed. What are you doing in his bed, girl? Like, oh, come on, dude. And things go from being cooling off to ice cold when they hear a loud banging at their front door. And to their credit, they don't do the horror movie trope. With the added emotional baggage of just having almost banged your not wife and not husband, and between them deciding what to do if they need to grab something to defend themselves with, the door busts down and it's Velocity security demanding that J1 come with them. D2 naturally kind of goes into a fight, flight, freeze response. She just locks up, and the security is like, drop the phone. You're not calling the police, drop the phone. And she just kind of freezes up. I don't know if it's like, was she considering trying to make a break for it while dialing 911 or what? But she locks up, like I said, and she gets popped right in the face. Like, literally right in between the eyes. It's fucking horrifying. J1 is in shambles. He's just too emotionally distraught to do anything. He can't resist, and they drag him off. And that concludes J1's storyline for episode 2. J2 is just more the same, honestly. We got a fish out of water story about this rich asshole who really just wants the hot wife, and oh, well, I guess the son's here too. And he's just trying to acclimate to not having his material conditions met. He moves through the episode trying to like low-key learn where everything is and seem normal, and go through J1's phone and try to memorize as much as he can, so that way he doesn't appear to stick out as much as he will eventually stick out. It's real slimy, disgusting behavior. The only one saving grace I will say about his characterization is how genuinely happy he seems to be with his life. Like, when he looks at D1, when he looks at Daniela Prime, he really, like, you would see the light in his eyes. Like, he just wants her so bad. But not in, I wouldn't even say in like a creepy way. It's almost like an idolization where he's had this image and fantasy of her built up for like 15 years at this point, and he wants to be vulnerable with her. He wants to maybe not just outright say, yeah, I'm not your husband, because normally people will freak out about that, but he wants to just have that life with her. But it's like we said before, there's so much difference that's passed between them in 15 years that basically it would almost become impossible to really be the person that they're expecting you to be. So all in all, you know, a really great J1 episode, a really great world building episode. There is even some redeemability with the parts that J2 are in, but that's not his character, right? He's supposed to be he's his evil twin, right? So all in all, really great episode. Highly enjoyed it. Moving on, we've got episode 3, The Box. Shout out Roddy Rich. So the box within the show is actually the mechanism by which they travel through the many worlds. We'll get into the fine, nuanced mechanics of how it works, but for now, that's just what the episode title is in relation to. Moreover, it probably relates to how J1 is feeling about being trapped in another world and not having any way out. Almost like being stuck in a box. Okay, moving on, all memes aside. We pick up in episode 3 where we left off in episode 2. Jason 1 gets dragged back to Velocity headquarters where eventually he relents and agrees to work with them alongside Leighton Vance, the college friend CEO I mentioned earlier. Their primary motivation is to get Jason 1 to, quote, remember everything. Well, that's kind of a problem because they don't know he's not the same guy yet. Yeah, I guess earlier in the review, whenever Leighton Vance was like, hey, you're being kind of sus, he didn't really understand that it wasn't the same guy. He just thought his boy was being weird. To be fair, Leighton Vance was never really the scientist type. He was more the money guy in the group, but we'll get to that later. Shortly after some ground rules are set and expectations are laid out, Leighton Vance takes J1 on a tour of Velocity proper along with J2's research notes on the breakthroughs he made to create the box. And I guess this is the perfect time to get my disclaimer out of the way and be upfront with everyone. Again, I'll just keep iterating it throughout the entirety of this show. I am not a scientist, a philosopher, formally educated in really anything. I'm just a guy with a mic, and truthfully, I've been spending the better part of a week trying to figure out how exactly I'm going to lay out all of this so that it's still coherent and interesting enough that I don't lose you. But with all that out of the way, here we go. We'll start with the box, the most simple thing of everything, even though it's definitely not very simple when you get down to the technicalities. As we briefly mentioned earlier in the show, the whole premise of the box operates off of many worlds interpretation and superposition. Superposition is just the uncertainty of a wave function in a nonlinear equation. The nonlinear equation part isn't really that important. That just breaks down into where something is in relation to time and space. I'm sure everyone's heard the Schrodinger's cat analogy by this point, where the cat can both be alive or dead until you measure it. The only thing that you have to really worry about superposition is the fact that the uncertainty of the thing becomes certain when you observe it. Boom, that easy. Well, the box basically functions as a way to put the whole human body in superposition. Now, in real science, there's plenty of reasons why this isn't considered even to be a remote possibility, but this is science fiction, baby. However, this is where things become very, very interesting. If you have the whole human body in superposition, right, it can't technically really be in superposition because you are consciously observing your own experience. Subjectively, at least. Like, you are observing yourself because you are yourself, obviously. However, they sneakily got around this somehow. Again, more science fiction mumbo-jumbo, which actually does have real-world roots that I don't think were researched or even, like, fully understood by the time that Blake Crouch was writing this, so kudos to that guy. But essentially what they do is inject a drug intravenously, the same drug that J2 kidnapped J1 using, that inhibits a certain part of the prefrontal cortex where, quote, consciousness is generated. We never get any real description of how the drug does this. We just kind of have to take it at face value for the plot, but realistically, that's like the smallest favor the show asks you to do in terms of like suspension of disbelief. So now that we understand exactly how the box works and how the literal plot driver functions, we'll put a pin in the discussion just for a moment so we could clear up the rest of the episode and then jump back into it. And honestly, it's not so bad to talk about. I really enjoyed J2's storyline within the episode. As we move through the series, there'll be plenty of other examples of this, but Daniela is kind of a free-spirited person just at a base level. So she decides to throw a hosting dinner for all of her friends. And I'm hesitant to say just her friends because when you're married and you have a shared life together over such a long period of time, they're really more just like family friends. It's implied that J1 is close to all of them in a similar regard, or even more so in some cases, to them as Daniela is. So J2 is going to be doing a lot of heavy lifting to fly under the radar unnoticed, at the bare minimum, right? Most people, most reasonable people, I don't think will be so self-involved or self-interested in a friendly, like, Friendsgiving kind of environment to not notice, right? But J2 manages to pull it off, and it gives us a ton of insight into just who he is as a person. You could see his much more Machiavellian side, and it's just like, the kind of social maneuvering he's doing, it's just very interesting. The J2 subplot is not boring this episode for sure. Okay, we could move it back to J1. J1 having so much information about J2, his motivation, drive, and in a real sense, his own capacity to discover and push the boundaries of understanding, tries to rush the process of understanding, ironically enough, and presses Ryan, or R2, the Ryan within J2's universe, for more information that kind of tips his hand that he's an imposter. Naturally, being one of the company's most valuable assets and employees, he's going to be under surveillance, right? And eventually Leighton Vance gets wind of this, and it's not looking good for J1. Eventually, Velocity Security comes and removes Ryan from the cell with Jason and basically tell him, like, hey, don't worry about this guy. We're just going to ask him some questions. Flash forward a bit, it's implied on screen that J1 has been waiting for a bit, like maybe they were really interrogating this guy hard, but eventually Leighton Vance comes back, and the implication is that they just straight up killed him. Leighton Vance is just like, oh yeah, we're gonna go discuss things on the board about something. He makes some lame-ass excuse to go leave him, because, I mean, you have to assume that the reason, like the psychological reason, like Leighton Vance would even be doing this is, like, there's a couple of reasons, right? Either A, Ryan really is dead, and he's like, hey, we're still figuring out what to do with you, or B, Ryan is still alive, and he's just using this as, like, a pressuring mechanism for him to make him comply with Velocity and work with them again. Because you have to think, at that point, Leighton Vance, like, this isn't your homeboy anymore, and this is, like, a guy who looks like him, but could be anybody. Has the capacity to be as smart, so maybe he's still useful to you, but, like, ultimately, your golden goose is gone. Shortly after Leighton Vance takes his leave from J1's cell, Amanda comes back and basically breaks him out. During their attempted escape, they end up basically getting cornered into having to use the box itself to escape. In a rush, they grab a big box of the drugs, the IV drugs that allow them to even interface with the box, so to speak, and they just haul ass into it. So they inject the drug once they're in the box, and the depiction and the reasoning and, like, the natural logical processes you would go through if you were even imagining or considering this to be a real possibility, like the logical processes that the author runs through and the reason they make sense is just so fascinating. They find themselves in a corridor that seemingly just goes on infinitely, and it's in an abyssal kind of liminal space. It's only the corridor, and it's not exactly well defined either. It's like, if you look at it a certain way, you could see that the space you're inhabiting isn't technically space at all. But yeah, that's where episode 3 officially ends, and we pick up exactly where we left off in episode 4, titled The Corridor. And I would like to circle back to the name of the corridor, because I think it's probably one of the more profound names for the episode so far. I mean, this episode in particular, we're going to really be getting into the nitty-gritty of, like, the possible philosophical extrapolation you could be doing, the metaphysics of it all. It's going to be really fun to talk about. So without further ado, let's just jump right in. As Amanda and J1 come to, they notice that the corridor itself is lined with a bunch of doors, but they're not any doors. They're the same door that they came in, but repeated infinitely along the corridor itself. So just to get the party started, right, we could talk about metaphysics real quick, just get a basic definition so we could touch base and we all are on the same page. Funnily enough, even though it sounds like it is a science, metaphysics is a specific kind of philosophy, right? It mainly concerns itself with the very foundational things about reality. Think real big picture abstracts, so like time, substance, existence, causality, things like that, right? Like real big picture, like without these, if one of these things were removed, reality as you know it would kind of fall apart. Now, one specific subfield of metaphysics is something called ontology. Being a subfield of metaphysics, ontology is going to be concerned with big picture things, right? Big picture abstractions that have to deal with reality. Specifically being and existence itself at a foundational level. As far as I understand it, usually they go pretty hand in hand. Like, you can't have metaphysics without an understanding of ontology. The reason I bring it up is because both are relevant to what I'm going to be talking about, and also some of the philosophers I'm going to be citing in the next couple of minutes are going to be directly related to ontology, insofar as they're trying to make broad claims about how reality even is structured. So just keep all that in mind while we move forward through the review. Picking up with the plot real quick, because it's going to go hand in hand, trust me. J1 and Amanda eventually go through enough doors that they realize that they lead to other worlds that they exist in that are just completely in shambles, eventually concluding that their mental state and their emotions and how they're trying to relate to the world they want directly affect the world that they will inhabit. Moving back to the philosophical front. When I was first watching this show, and specifically this episode, and this culmination and connection between all the episodes that came before it, specifically the end of episode 3, how they awaken in the corridor, with all of the corridor sequences after the fact, I was immediately struck with this gnawing sense that I have maybe recognized this somewhere or internalized it in a weird way from some other thing that I learned about. The point I'm trying to get across is that it really did affect me. Like, I don't know if it was a sense of knowing or being, but I knew I had to look into it further. So after some Googling and research and all the nerdy show notes stuff I do, all that led me to one philosopher that I do remember actually being very excited about whenever I was first learning about him. Technically, it's two guys, but we're only going to be referring to one of them because I'm not going to be using like the mathematical proofs that the other guy provided and he extrapolated off of. But anyways, the guy's name is Gilles Deleuze. He was a French philosopher. Shout out to shout out France, I guess. But yeah, even for his time, he was a bit controversial. He's a bit of an out there thinker, which is why I think I relate to what he's saying more. But also, I just enjoy, I think it resonates with me for a lot of reasons, but regardless, he was what's known as a constructivist. Now, this wasn't just a mere way of categorizing the world or behavior like most philosophers are trying to do at the time, but it was almost a complete bottom-up teardown of traditional thinking. Ontologically, you could say that he believed that we were in the process of becoming and not discovering who we are. The main difference between structuralists and transcendentalists and constructivists that have their thinking rooted in immanence fundamentally boils down to being and becoming. If you truly believe that structuralism and transcendentalism are the way to go, then you believe that you're a product of the world around you. There's certain underlying structures and flows of things that kind of impact you more than you have any right to claim personal endeavor for achieving. Let me give an example to help clarify this. This is not my example, don't at me, I'm just parroting what I read because that's what I am. I'm just an entertainment parrot, alright? Imagine, if you will, there's a man who walks into a record store. He walks into this record store every weekend, it's what he likes to do, and eventually he notices that it's always the same woman working whenever he comes in. Eventually he takes a liking to her and he becomes romantically inclined towards her. A structuralist line of thinking would be, oh yes, of course he will come into this record store. He has an affinity towards music. He's a music enjoyer. That is because of the proclivities and influence of how he was raised. This record store is on his usual walk to work whenever he gets off work on Fridays. It all makes sense. It all checks out here. Of course, he would naturally be attracted to this woman. She's of about breeding age with him, and they're both cohorts within this demographic of generation. Very boring, right? But the structuralist would take it even one step further, because he would argue, oh, well, you know, of course this man was just being what he was. He was just a being and discovering the existing flows within his environment. Continuing on with the example, the man decides to learn the drums because he always sees the lady tapping away with her own drumsticks at the counter. He thinks, oh yeah, well, it'll be a good way to break the ice. Maybe she'll be more inclined to like me. Maybe I'll be more dateable to her in her eyes. At that moment, the structuralist would assign him the label as a drummer. Whether or not he could play them, or even if he likes them, the fact that he has fallen into the flow and that he is essentially discovering who he is now a drummer. While the constructivist would say something like, oh, well, he's negotiating with the world he lives in, he's actively building out his personality and his values and, things like that. He's becoming rather than being. It's a very fine difference, but it is a big difference. And ultimately, that's the big distinguishing factor between immanence and transcendence, which we'll get into the details of shortly, but I just wanted to point that out. Now, I've said transcendence a couple of times now, and I think it's about time we define terms for it. Transcendentalism basically relies on the idea that there are higher concepts and realities than what we're able to even conceive. It kind of goes back to Plato's theory of forms. Like, to a transcendentalist, there will always be the perfect version of something, and there'll even be the perfect version of perfection, which is just completely absurd, but, if you're rocking with it, then that's cool. While on the other hand, we were talking about constructivism, which ultimately relies on immanence in the same way that structuralism relies on transcendence. And immanence is basically the idea that whatever is there, whatever exists, emanates the properties that it has currently. It's almost like a more evolved idea of animism. So I hope it's becoming clearer now how Deleuze can believe that people are in constant negotiation and becoming what they are because of their culminated experiences and their negotiation with the world around them through the eminence of the world around them. That the world itself is emanating the values and the properties that it has because they're already a part of the world itself, as opposed to drawing from some higher transcendent order or concept that the world is adhering to, i.e. transcendence. To really drive this point home so that there's no confusion on it at all, we're going to take our existing example of the man in the record store to its next extreme. Imagine through a horrible twist of fate, or, we're not going to get into that philosophy, but through a horrible twist of fate, right? The man ends up losing both of his arms in a horrible accident. The structuralist transcendentalist will say that man will always be a drummer. Fuck it if he can't play. Who cares that he actually can't do the physical act of drumming? There's some immutable, unmovable part of his very core being because of the environment around him that he is just a drummer. And because of that, he will always be a drummer. While the constructivist will say, oh, well, he's not necessarily a drummer unless he actively decides to learn a new way of drumming. Like, unless he himself says he's a drummer, then he's not a drummer. Being versus becoming. I hope that cleared up the whole example and digestibility of these big concepts. I know it's a lot, but I'm trying to get it in a small amount of time, Okay, so believe it or not, we're only halfway through getting through the context, so just bear with me, please. Switching back to the plot, it is also discovered by J1 and Amanda that their emotional state and, let's say, negotiation or desire for a certain type of world can affect the type of world that they end up inhabiting. I hope you're smelling what I'm cooking. I really do gotta give it up to Blake Couch, whatever the fuck this dude's name is, because man oh man, he is cooking up a masterpiece. I don't know if it was his intention or not, but I think if you squint your eyes and you tilt your head and you think about London hard enough whenever you watch this, that you actually can see that he's kind of marrying the two ideas, the two oppositional frameworks of transcendentalism and immanence into one functioning manifold. So structuralism and, by extension, transcendentalism rely on there being some kind of inconceivable higher form or abstraction, right? Or even very basically something that we can't perceive the reality of. And we know that immanence is a philosophical perspective that asserts that certain things have inherent qualities to them, which inform our negotiation and relation to those things in building our own character and base of knowledge through constructivism. And that constructivism is based around difference and becoming rather than being. Keep all this in mind as we move back to the plot just one more time. During episode 4, J1 and Amanda also discuss how it's even possible that they're conceiving of this place given that it's literally supposed to be outside of their conscious understanding. By being placed in superposition and being able to withstand this superposition in a conscionable way via the drug that inhibits their prefrontal cortex in such a way that it even allows it to, by definition and by objective reality, they have transcended their understanding of reality. They are now able to function in a constructivist way on a transcendent plane. And we can even take this a step further to truly marry the two ideas together in a much more obvious way. So for starters, we can assert that there is an inobjectable, transcendent quality to consciousness. So there's a higher form of consciousness that you can only reach whenever you're in superposition and you've removed the observer effect. But it appears to me that the observer effect is just subjectivity, right? By removing one's subjectivity, you're unable to even observe yourself. You are being conscious, but not being consciously aware of being conscious. Regardless, it still doesn't detract from the idea that throughout all of the expansive transcendental reality that you're able to access by removing one's subjectivity, the common factor amongst all those realities, or you could say the immanent property of all those realities, is your subjectivity. Not only that, but once you're in the transcendental plane of reality, you actually are exercising immanence even further, as it's your emotion and negotiation with the plane of existence, but also the doors themselves that are the driving factor to whatever world you end up reaching. And that's basically it. The show posits a sci-fi reality where you kind of can have transcendence and immanence at the same time. Matter of fact, they're kind of codependent on each other, which is like pretty crazy to think about. You have an established hierarchy of reality where subjectivity is the absolute transcendent value, but it's that same subjectivity and free will, so to speak, that is the eminence of the entire plane. It's like how you interact with the plane at all. It's how the plane has even been formed, arguably, through every different decision, every superposition that you've been put into. So yeah, sorry to take you on that wild ride of, hopefully it was coherent, but I know it was wild for sure in the least. But yeah, that's mainly why I really, really enjoy Dark Matter, because this is really the whole emotional and philosophical crux of the show. Not only conceptually is it really cool to think about, and it's done in such a unique way. I mean, aside from like maybe Doctor Who, but I don't really fuck with Doctor Who like that. But yeah, it's just so good. Ugh, now back to the plot, I guess. Nah, the plot's good. The plot's still good. We start off with Jason too, right? He's sick of living a normal life, which is ironic because that's kind of what he wants, right? He just wanted, I mean, technically, I'm getting ahead of myself, but technically he really just did want Daniela. Like, also, Charlie's there, but he didn't really care about Charlie. Anyways, he decides to quit his job at the university, and he does it in a really spectacular way. He just, like, starts punking all the kids, and, yeah, it's a good scene. It definitely demonstrates, like, how different these two Jasons are from each other, really demonstrating the whole constructivist idea of everything. Like, they were literally the same people until 15 years ago, and 15 years is a long-ass time, you know, like, that's literally it's a long time. I was gonna say the obvious, like it's literally how old Charlie is, but that is the point where they broke apart. So yeah, like any good American capitalist, Jason 2 decides he's going to monetize and commodify his box and sell it to the ultra wealthy. Lucky for him, he can also keep it in the family because he's going to sell it to Leighton Vance, who in J1's world is just a rich trust fund kid who kind of just does whatever. He's worth enough money that he doesn't really see it as a thing, kind of just as a lifestyle. He ends up convincing him to follow him down into his abandoned little dungeon where he keeps the box at, and he takes him to some crazy, oh, well, what if, like, I don't know what he was channeling emotionally, but he takes him to, like, a party planet, and the whole culture, everything is just like, it's just one big party there. He gives him the whole rich guy philanthropy spiel, and he's like, oh, imagine, what if you could pick any world? What about a world where your dead dad's still alive and he hugged you, and all you'll have to do is kidnap and murder yourself and then assimilate into that world, but it'd be cool, right? Leighton, being a rich guy and having no self-control, immediately jumps on board and has no problem doing whatever unspeakable things he has to do to be able to get this new thing that only he can have. And, oh, well, money can't buy you this, Leighton. Like, imagine, think about it. Like, yeah, ultra scarcity, basically. So Leighton just agrees to be his pay pig, basically. He's going to transfer all of his wealth, literally everything, and escape into the box. He's going to get like a 40 box of the IV drugs, so you got 40 shots round trip. You could go crazy, just don't end up on some weird fucking exploding zombie lava world. Leighton's like, that sounds bad. You need to train me before I take a shot going anywhere. So eventually they work up a deal, the deal is made, the money is secure, the bag is gotten. Now all Jason 2 has to do is convince Daniela 1 that all of this is up to code. Meanwhile, the C plot happening in the background of all this is Daniela 1, Charlie 1, and one of Daniela 1's friends all basically getting this weird vibe that Jason isn't really the same. Like, they can't really pin down what it is, but they all have their own little nuances where all throughout these past 4 episodes, they basically have had an off-canny feel from him at one point or another. So slowly but surely, the cat is finding his way out the bag. And that about wraps up episode 4. Next up, episode 5, Worldless. Worldless can mean a lot of things in reference to this episode. The most obvious answer, and the one given to us directly in the show, is Jason 1 and Amanda coming to the realization that they're effectively homeless in a cosmic sense. They've been completely cut off and orphaned from their home worlds. However, in a much deeper sense, Jason 1 is coming to terms with the fact that he doesn't really have anything without his family. Over the course of the episode, we see Jason 1, and even Amanda to a certain degree, fall into this hopeless despair or even nihilism to a degree. So let's find out why. For the sake of cohesion and narrative consistency within the review itself, I decided to omit some things that happened in episode 4 that we'll go over real quick. As we discussed in our philosophy segment during episode 4, we find out that the actual mechanism by which you interface with the box and the quantum realm, I guess we could say, in general, is by a combination of projected emotional state and desirability. For example, in episode 4, one of Jason 1 and Amanda's first forays into the worlds, they were greeted with a scorching, terrible, inhospitable world. And I don't mean scorching in like the Mad Max kind of a way where you can survive if you find shade or the world is still somewhat inhabitable. It's just been thrust into a state of chaotic disaster. It appears to be something way worse. Just off of how the show visually depicts it in episode, either the sun has expanded to be like a red dwarf, so it's basically right on top of Earth, or the Earth's atmosphere has become so eroded away that it effectively doesn't have any shielding whatsoever. Now, there's a couple of ways we can read into the character's state of mind or their emotional state from just this example. Being that it's the first world that they tried to venture into following all the craziness of escaping Velocity while they were trying to either kill them or capture them indefinitely, you can pretty easily infer that the characters were excited, they were desperate to get somewhere else, they had a burning passion to find their loved ones, but also, in the same regard, they had to have had an underlying current of fear or disaster or even impending doom that they were feeling. hence the world that they ended up stepping into. Like we touched on earlier in our little philosophy segment, they're actually negotiating with the world, their past and future, in this one precise moment, eminently, and therefore deciding or negotiating with the world on where they're going to end up. After collecting themselves and basically being glad that they didn't get burned to a crisp, Jason, 1, and Amanda try to go into another world. The world they find themselves in doesn't necessarily seem to be completely inhospitable, but is clearly in some kind of post-disaster state. Everything is desolate and decrepit and literally falling apart. And that was the only thing that really seemed to make them get out of there, is that they step out into a Chicago that has clearly been hit by some kind of munitions. I'm not going to say whether or not it was nukes or what, but the fact that there's literally no one around shows that it's post-disaster. Now, my interpretation of the character's state whenever they're going in that would have manifested a world like this would be an initial confusion on their part, which would lead to a confusing world to be in. While unclear how exactly this world fell into disarray, the world is literally crumbling around them. The buildings, there's sandstorms, there's all kinds of stuff that is both destroying and rearranging the environment that they're inhabiting. I'd also like to point out that the crumbling buildings and sandstorms likely represent some kind of slow descent or backsliding into hopelessness. Like, they're not quite there yet, but there's enough confusion and doubt within themselves that they're starting to lose their conviction. On their third attempt, they end up in a blizzard, almost like if you've seen the movie, it's kind of an old movie, but it's a classic. The Day After Tomorrow, they end up in like a Day After Tomorrow world, but it's Chicago instead of New York. It was on this attempt that they discovered, or made the connection rather, between mental state, emotional state, ideation, and mental projection as the way to travel between the worlds. With how complicated the philosophy segment was, breaking down hierarchy, transcendence, immanence, all that, I hope you can see why I wanted to front load episode 4 with the terms and context. That way we could cover this part of episode 4 as a conjunctive point for episode 5. So with the context of why Jason, 1, and Amanda are going to be feeling so hopeless and, quote, worldless within the show, we can move forward with episode 5 proper. From what I can remember about how episode 5 starts, I believe Jason, 1, and Amanda are in the corridor, just vibing, trying to get their minds right, discussing different plans or strategies for summoning the correct world that they want to go into. Actually, Amanda in J2's world, not only was she his main squeeze and his personal psychologist ? But her actual role at Velocity was being the trainer or the psychological coach for the box pilots. So we've got Amanda coaching Jason 1 like, yeah, just think of peaceful thoughts, try to center yourself, imagine it's real quiet, you just want to go in and check things out. Well, I don't know how Jason fucks this up. He does bring them to a quiet world. That part he gets right. But it's a world in disaster. No surprise there. But the context for how this world's downfall occurred is actually very, very interesting. It's the first moment where the show writers give you a little yummy piece of what's to come. So as it turns out, Jason 2 was not the first pilot of the box, which in of itself is interesting and gives us another glimpse into his character. He's no Wright brothers. He's not going to be the one to test his new dangerous thing. So, I'm not going to call him a coward, but it wouldn't be wrong to interpret that. The second or the third pilot is who we find here. It's actually Blair. In Jason 1's world, Blair 1 is Daniela 1's friend, and she's a lawyer. But I guess in this world, she's just... I shouldn't even say she's just, because she's being entrusted with piloting, like, a quantum spaceship, so that's pretty cool. But yeah, she's a box pilot in J2's world. So once Amanda figures out that this is Blair 2, Blair 2 goes on to tell Amanda, yeah, I went through a bunch of worlds, nothing was going right, I kind of just snowballed my way into worse and worse situations. She then explains the reason for this world's downfall is that a previous world she was in, there's these weird, like, maybe they're alien, who knows? I mean, we're talking about infinity, right? Even if all the worlds you can travel through are only worlds that you have existed in, that's still, I mean, I'm real bad at math, guys. Like, that is not my strong suit, but as far as I know, theoretically, that is still an infinite number, right? Like, yeah. Anyways, Anyway, she ended up coming to this world from a previous world with a bunch of mutated locust alien things in tow, and they breed real quick, and they're really hard to kill, so this world is basically fucked. It's at this moment that Jason 1 and Amanda kind of see the writing on the wall in a very literal sense. There's fucking bullet holes everywhere. Shit's like smoldering even though there's no fire. It's weird. Like, the whole place is a wreck, but according to Blair, Velocity HQ is able to purge them before some of them got out. So they're safe so long as they're quiet, but she puts on the CCTV cameras and it shows outside and they're just fucking everywhere swarming. Like, they own the planet now, basically. Jason 1 and Amanda take this time to kind of get back in their own skin here with Blair. It's never outright stated or even like hinted at in the show, but you have to imagine that inhabiting that transcendent reality where all the other realities converge, where you're the quantum being because you're in superposition, it has to be weird or exhausting or something. Like, it can't be easy to do. So to me, at least, it would make sense and track that it would be comforting to inhabit the lower subjective reality. And the characters seem to play it off well here. I mean, they could just be circumstances, or maybe I'm looking too much into things, but they seem to be really at ease and enjoy the moment here with Blair, even though they're in a world where they could be eaten to death by locust mutant things in like a matter of seconds. After resting and spending some time with Blair, they eventually do offer Blair to come with them through the box, but she is not having it. Blair then goes on to have some kind of PTSD breakdown and basically damn Jason, the box, the world, life. She is just traumatized to the utmost degree and cannot go back into the box. So with a heavy heart, Jason 1 and Amanda leave her to her fate in the new world. While Jason 1 and Amanda are back in the corridor, Amanda attempts to again coach Jason 1 using the new information that they acquired from Blair as well. For a time, it doesn't appear to be any more effective than before, until Jason 1 has some kind of aha moment. Every time we see Jason 1 attempting to contact another world, he appears to be doing so as clinically as possible. He'll completely stifle his emotions, completely stifle them, so that there is basically none, and he will only think about a pre-prepared message that he's written down using only material description. For whatever reason, we're not shown and it's not outright stated, so we just have to imagine that J1 had some kind of organic insight as to how the box works. Or even possibly just how his own mind works, how his own mental state works. Like, he could have had an epiphany of introspection. But eventually, he does figure it out enough that they end up in a populated world. The only downside is that this world is embroiled in some kind of deadly pathogen epidemic. Highly dystopic. No one's allowed outside. There's like a military curfew going on. They do get in trouble because of that. If you have disease or you know someone with disease, you have to put something red out on your property, like some kind of flag or something, but there's red everywhere. It's very obvious. You could contextualize even before they tell you, like, yeah, something's probably going on that's bad if you got red outside your house. But the good news is that they're making progress. Every world they've gone to up until this point has been completely depopulated or is in some kind of state of disaster. And while this is still a disaster, there's still people around, and this world might make it whenever they leave it. But before they do leave it, J1 needs to see Daniela. Now that he knows that it is inhabited, like, he's gonna take the risk. He doesn't care if he gets the disease, he's gonna go see her. After having entered his home and Daniela's home within this world, J1 does find out that Daniela has whatever this disease is. And just as he's finding this out, the military actually pull up because of the curfew, and they start spazzing hard. They do a quick test on everyone, and everyone's negative, except for the wife, obviously, Daniela. And the military doctors basically tell him, like, look, man, here's some morphine. Like, you don't have a lot of time with her, and you don't want it to get to the point where it starts to suck. So just talk to her, enjoy her, but, like, you're on the clock. So J1 starts to talk to Daniela, whatever, this familiar stranger, so to speak. And he notices that they have the same picture of their same family trip to Yellowstone or whatever that I mentioned earlier in the review. So he gets to talking to her about that, and he realizes while they're talking that that's the way he's going to find his way back to her. He just needs to go all in on his feeling, his drive, his desire, his love for her whenever he's trying to load up a new world. However, all good things come to an end, and it's heartbreaking that he has to kill his own wife. While it is a mercy killing, the first world that he does find Daniela in, it's interesting that it's a pandemic world, so he can't even be close to her. Like, does that signal to something within his character or their relationship? Does he think that he can't really be close to her? Does it have any bearing on even his realization that he needs to go all in on his feelings? Is he not normally emotionally available? There's so much nuance to the character and this piece of writing. I love it. After testing negative inside the corridor, with the help of Amanda's coaching and his newfound understanding of how to pilot the box, they do start making good progress. The next world they go to is inhabited. However, whenever Jason gets to Daniela whatever's house, he's assaulted by Charlie. Like, he starts putting work on him. Like, it's pretty crazy. And we discover that in this world, Jason is a criminal. Like, he's incarcerated. That's all we know. Whenever he's in the house, Daniela calls the police and she's like, oh, my husband, he should be in jail, yada yada. And then Charlie comes out the cut and just starts beating his ass. It's pretty crazy. Makes you wonder, like, what Jason is capable of. I mean, clearly we've seen how brilliant he could be. We see how loving and how stable he could be, but now we get to see how unstable he is. Was it white-collar crime? Was he doing money laundering? Or did he kill someone? It's all very interesting to think about. And that'll wrap up Jason 1 and Amanda's side of the story. Now we can move on to the B plot with Jason 2 and J1's world. As we discussed earlier in the review, Jason 2 doesn't appear to be very invested in J1's world holistically. It seems like he really only wants Daniela. It's this kind of behavior that Jason 2 displays inhabiting Jason 1's world that makes everyone uncomfortable around him. Charlie, Daniela 1, Blair 1, all of them have openly and actively talked about this with one another. So whenever Jason 2 comes to Daniela 1 and says, hey, I quit my job. By the way, sport, here's a brand new car. Oh, and hey, we don't have to worry about money anymore. I got a private investor for my decades-old research, so you should pick up painting again, by the way. Naturally, Daniela 1's going to feel alienated and isolated in her marriage. To make matters worse, even though Jason 2 just got back from doing all this crazy shit with Leighton, he's like, oh, by the way, I gotta go run some more errands. So he leaves again right after he just dropped all this huge bomb about how their life's gonna change on him. What he's really gonna do is use the box to go pick up some more of those IV drugs from his original world. And the episode ends with him doing that, and it has a really cute scene between him and one of his random employees where he pulls up and he hops out of the box real quick. He looks around and he kind of like scurries over to where the other IV drugs are, almost like he's not trying to be seen, because in his mind, he already knows that this world is forsaken. Like, he doesn't want to come back, but everyone's waiting for him to come back. He does end up getting spotted by one of the employees though, and she just kind of looks hesitantly at him like, is that you? Is that really you? And he's just like, yeah, and just fucking runs away with the drugs. And yeah, that's episode 5. Pretty good. Overall, pretty good. Very well done. Not one of the weaker episodes. And that'll take us into episode 6, Superposition. As we discussed earlier in the show, superposition refers to the wave function of a particle when observed in relation to quantum physics. The whole idea being that something could be existing in 2 positions at a single time. Virtually the same way that Daniela 1 has been observing Jason 2, trying to inhabit Jason 1's role, but inherently knowing that there's something wrong. Along with that, Jason 1's plot in this episode revolves around him understanding how to navigate the different worlds better, thereby becoming more familiar with superposition as a conceptual force rather than it being a force of nature. Off of name alone, we can already determine what this episode's going to be about and how the themes are going to wrap nicely into the narrative. We jump back into the show following Daniela 1. In an attempt to reconcile with her new position within the marriage, she goes along with Jason 2's idea of her picking up her painting career again. Whenever Jason 2 first sees Daniela 1 painting, everything seems completely fine on the surface. Jason 2 only sees her painting in passing, and there's not really a whole lot of talking or investigation happening. You only get this vague, dry impression that some kind of underlying expectation has been met. Jason 2 and even Daniela 1 don't really seem to show the activity the same regard or importance. The following scene, we follow Jason 2 as he picks up Charlie from a date. A first date, actually. I think it's a first date, so it's like his first foray into romance. That in of itself has been a minor little subplot that hasn't really had much plot significance other than Charlie feeling the vibes off whenever he's chatting with his dad. But anyways, Jason 2 picks up Charlie from his date, and Jason goes on to vent about how his buddy's stealing his girl away from him. He'll have minor plot significance later, not necessarily him, but his property, like his family inheritance property, because the kid's wealthy, will come into play later. And here we get to see a little bit more insight into Jason 2's personality as well, telling him how he needs to do something about him while he can before he loses his girl. It all rounds out to be a nice little encapsulation of his character and his motivation, his underlying regrets, and what he looks forward to in his new life. I'm not going to recall all of it here, but it's pretty well done. And that leads us to Jason 2's very first slip-up that kind of starts the cascade of dominoes that eventually lead to his downfall. I don't know if it's because he was absent-mindedly chatting with his new son, or if it's because he didn't know outright, it wasn't in his study guide, so to speak. But Charlie has a horrible nut allergy. Like, he will die real fast, real fucking fast if he has anything to do with tree nuts. And Jason 2 gives him some kind of, like, Ben and Jerry's knockoff or whatever the hell. I mean, you gotta consider, right, that even if he's from, like, the nearest parallel universe to Jason 1's universe, not all the brands can be the same, right? Like, he can tell and deduce that this is, like, ice cream that he picked up from a gas station to give his son as a snack, right? Because he's trying to be a good dad, but ultimately, unless he took the time, which demonstrably he hasn't, he couldn't even check, which leads me to believe he didn't know. But at the same time, it's also in line with his character so far that he wouldn't take the time to check, you know? But yeah, after handing Charlie the ice cream, after like 20 seconds of him eating it, he's gotten like 3 bites in because he's sad, he's losing his girl to his best buddy, he's third wheeling it hard, he's like emotionally eating, he's exasperated, so he's breathing heavy already. It's already a bit into the reaction that he has, like the, oh shit, is there nuts in this dad moment? And then his dad's like, fuck, I don't think so, because this bitch didn't take the time to read the fucking ice cream. And then we get another peek into Jason 2's character, because this dude is not good under pressure. Once it truly dawns on Jason 2 what's happening to Charlie, he is just fucking, he's folded. You call him laundry because that man is folding up. Point is, he doesn't handle pressure very well. So after failing to find the EpiPen inside of Charlie's bag, whether it's because Charlie's a dumb teenager and he's fashionable and he has a bunch of different backpacks and he forgot it, who knows? Point is, it's not there. So Jason 2 drives him to the ER. Charlie does make it out unscathed, but point is, it's still scary, and like, you kind of failed your son in his moment of like necessity, but who knows? Maybe Charlie doesn't think it's a big deal, but Daniela definitely thinks that shit's a big deal. The real kicker is that she's not even like making a scene about it either. Just sheer, utter disappointment. And to make matters worse, while they're being very animated and gesturing a lot because this is a very emotional moment for both of them, Daniela 1 notices that he has track marks from using the IV drug to be able to transfer between worlds. So Daniela 1 comes to the conclusion that clearly he's using something. I mean, there's the physical evidence right there on his body. Any reasonable person put in this position would probably come to the same conclusion. It's just how she goes about it that's a little bit unhinged, but then again, I don't know. She had every right to crash out about her husband nearly killing her son, where, like, the allergy was so important that he was probably the annoying kid to have in your class because you couldn't even eat a PB&J around him. But getting back to what Daniela does in response to this, after Jason 2, Daniela 1, and Charlie all get back to their house, Daniela 1 confides in her best friend Blair 1. If you remember, Blair 2 was the pilot in the other world. Upon hearing this, Blair is just either a really bad friend or a really good friend. Blair tells Daniela, you need to spy on your husband. And so she does. Later on in the episode, Jason 2 needs to go to his storage locker that he has. Not Jason 1's storage locker, but an independent storage locker that Jason 2 got when first arriving in this world. Once he concludes the business that he had inside the storage locker, Daniela then goes and is not quite able to get inside of it, but is able to pry it open enough to where there's no damage and there's no way of knowing someone's really even been accessing your stuff. And she's able to grab one of the IV drug ampules out from underneath the door. Naturally, with the drugs in her possession now, there's no denying that your husband is using. Now having this drug in her possession, there's no denying that your husband is using, but she doesn't really know what it is. You can't just look at a drug, look at some clear fluid inside of an ampule that you have to crack open, by the way. It's not like this is a vial of something. It's a completely closed something. She decides to take it to her one scientist friend who can maybe help her figure out what it is, Ryan. Remember, Ryan 1 in Jason 1's universe was elected for that Nobel Peace Prize equivalent thing that got the whole thing jumping. Ryan's like, yeah, I'll test it, but it's kind of crazy that Jason's using, like, he doesn't seem the type, yada yada. It's a nice insight into whatever proclivities that Ryan 1 would have. Like, you get to see a little bit more of him as a person, how he regards his loved ones. So after Ryan's done testing this drug for Daniela, they actually find out that this is the same drug that Ryan 1 is trying to develop in his world, but for completely different reasons. Like, funny the way fate works like that, but yeah, this is the drug that he's trying to work on. So he basically accuses Jason 2 of trying to do some kind of like corporate espionage or something. And here we see more of Jason 2's bullshit on display. He gives him the whole rigmarole he gave Jason 1 and Leighton and probably all the other pilot employees before him. And this completely stat checks Ryan 1. He's already eating out of the palm of his hand because Jason 2 basically hand waves away all the explanation of his scientific endeavor. He starts glazing him up crazy about how in my world, my Ryan did all these things, and I know you can do them too. Why did you ever think to work on this drug to work this way in this part of the brain for this kind of disease? You were so close, you almost had it. And surprisingly, even though Ryan's getting like a little bit roasted at the same time as he's being complimented, he's just very on board with everything that's happened. So then Jason offers the irresistible, right? He tells him, I can take you to other worlds right now. Even though you were just on my ass about, quote, stealing your drug. I got you, bro. Like, where do you want to go? Ryan gets on board with this, so now Jason has him in the palm of his hand. You've got to view this from Jason 2's point of view, right? You worked your whole life to get to this new world, and there's only this one nerdy guy you know you can take in pretty much every regard, and you have him as your plaything right now. It would be so easy. Just take him. You could Old Yeller this guy. Take him to any world you think he'd like, and just push him out the door, and he's not your problem anymore. And Jason does just that. To be fair and charitable, he did take him to a nice world, but I'm sure Ryan didn't appreciate basically getting interdimensionally kidnapped. Or I guess trafficked would be the better way of putting it, maybe. So with the trash effectively taken out, Jason 2 decides that it's probably the safest bet. It's in his best interest that he completely cut off his world from the rest of the worlds by entombing the box in concrete. I may have forgot to bring it up earlier in the review, but whenever he went to go get more ampules of the IV drug for Leighton Vance in J1's world, the employee he was trying to avoid told him, hey, by the way, J1 and Amanda 2, they made it out. They're somewhere in the universes now. So J2 basically doesn't want to take any chance that they're going to walk through the door ever. And that about covers the B plot to superposition. Now we can go over J1 and Amanda 2's trials. It's really just more of the same. Jason 1 and Amanda 2 have made progress, but not astonishing progress. They're reliably landing in occupied, healthy worlds, so to speak, but they're unable to really get the final distance. Like, they ran the marathon, they rounded the corner, they're on the home stretch, but it's like they're running in place. It's all very cool to see, you know, the montage of them having like their training arc and getting better at it, but all ultimately being disappointed. It's a great part of the show, don't get me wrong. There's just not a whole lot of meat to talk about. So I think we can wrap up episode 6 and move on to episode 7, titled In the Fires of Dead Stars. More like In the Fires of a Fire Name, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, this title is, I don't know if it's trying to wax poetical about love, but that's what I got from it. And the episode is somewhat on that tone, but I don't know, maybe I'm stretching. So in the way that the last episode was basically the Daniela and Jason show, this is going to be mainly the Jason and Amanda show. We can just cover Jason 2 and Daniela 1's part of the story this episode real quick, and then jump into the meat of the episode. The episode starts with Jason 2 basically having to deal with the consequences of his actions. While Jason 2 and his family are hanging out having brunch the next day, a police detective knocks on their door because Jason was the last person to be seen with Ryan. The reason they even have this clear of a picture to begin with is because Ryan has a girlfriend in this world, but I don't think he does in Jason 2's world. So it's kind of like one of those variables where it almost is like a crime of passion. Like, had he considered it even a little bit more, he could probably get away with it with no strings attached to him specifically. And we know that Jason didn't technically kill Ryan, but he might as well be dead. The important thing that I noticed whenever I was watching this scene was that Daniela, already having been suspicious of Jason, really isn't buying what he's trying to sell. Shortly after the police detective leaves, with this newfound courage that Daniela got from watching Jason just blatantly lie to cops, or at least what she can ascertain is him not telling the whole truth, she decides to confront him outright about his involvement with using drugs and what the drugs are. She is basically demanding answers at this point. And again, it is demonstrated perfectly about how Jason 2 can really turn on the social manipulation when he needs to. I think most high-performing businessmen, politicians, intellectuals, academia types will all have some kind of similar through line where they are pretty well adapted, or at least adept at maneuvering certain social situations. Perhaps not in a diagnosable, like, categorical, medical, sociopath, psychopath kind of a way, but even in just like a Machiavellian kind of a way. Jason 2 starts about all this bullshit about, oh, I've just been thinking about my life and how things are going to change, you know. I decided to pursue my research and that was stressful, so I'm just using on the side recreationally. He doesn't even say what specifically it is. Like, the whole, I think personally, in this specific moment in the story, Daniela is looking for reconciliation with who Jason is becoming versus who he has been. It all kind of wraps back to the whole philosophy segment we had where she's trying to understand and become compatible and interface with Jason and who he's becoming because she knows who he's been. She knows what the core of his being is. It's just that thing, that amorphous being is changing right now. It's really well done. Maybe I'm looking too much into the scene, but the way I read it is that Daniela isn't necessarily interested in like what the action plan is going to be if he's going to change doing the drugs. She does mention that is a part of what she says. She's like, can you handle it? Are you in control? I'm scared by this. But I think ultimately she's just looking to be on the same team as Jason again. Because when she confided in Blair about what's going on, she was saying that she doesn't feel a part of the relationship anymore. And it could be that she's feeling supplanted by the drug use itself, not insofar as that the drugs are the problem, but the emerging identity that Jason has in relation to using the drugs is the problem. Like, maybe she feels that she's being replaced by the drug use specifically. Like, I'm not saying that she's willing to do drugs with him, but I'm saying, like, I don't think that the drugs specifically are the problem here. Who knows? Maybe it's a massive L take. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. Maybe I just read the scene incorrectly, but that's the takeaway I got from it. And like I said, it's real short and sweet. That's the entirety of Daniela 1 and Jason 2's story within this episode. So now we could just continue on with the rest of the episode following Jason 1 and Amanda. By this time, Jason 1 and Amanda have basically been world hopping as long as each individual ampule of drug will allow them to. It's been roughly a month, so for a month more or less, they've just been constantly at 100. Never really knowing what's going to be through the next door. Even though they have some control over it, it's still not an exact science because they are unable to get where they need to go. Sure, they can probably almost always definitely hit an inhabited world, meet their worldly needs where they'll have someplace to eat, someplace to sleep. How they pay for this, the show never goes over. I don't know. But with Amanda's background in psychology and her specific training towards preparing pilots for their journey, Amanda suggests that they take a day off in some nice world. She's been meditating on the conceptuality and the emotional state she needs to be in to get them to that world. Jason, not really having anything to lose at this point, is like, yeah, okay, we could do that. So she does ultimately get them to like a super sci-fi futuristic post-scarcity utopia where they literally don't have to pay for anything and everything's great and they solved all the world's problems. But inherently because of that, the politics of the world are just way different. It's mentioned in passing. It's ultimately not a big deal to the plot, but it's something I thought that was interesting that I wanted to bring up. But what is important is that through their conversation and Amanda guiding him through her process of summoning this world, it does give Jason 1 more insight into how to better interface with the box. And it's throughout their time together in this new world, this progressive Chicago, let's say, that the title of the episode really starts to shine through. Jason 1 and Amanda do end up getting organically closer, whether it's from some kind of survivorship bias for them having gone through so much together, or whether it's trauma bonding, whatever you want to call it. Whatever psychological dressing you want to put onto it, they do end up in almost a romantic position within this episode. Throughout the course of their time in the progressive Chicago, it's almost framed as a will they, won't they, blind date, meet me at midnight by the clock tower kind of a feel. Ultimately culminating with them having their date on the, I guess, Chicago Space Needle, where Amanda reveals that the Amanda in this world went missing for whatever reason, casualty of demographics, I guess, and that she'll be staying in this world indefinitely. This causes Jason 1 to become a little bit more romantically entangled at the sheer fear that he will no longer be with her. I don't know, it's hard to really tap into what's happening psychologically with him, but they do end up sharing a very passionate, almost star-crossed lovers kind of a kiss. Shortly thereafter, Jason 1 does leave Amanda's new world and basically fails numerous times in a row to really locate his own world until he really lays it all on the line and is completely emotionally vulnerable with himself, to which he does successfully reach his prime world. And this is where worlds truly do collide. The episode ends proper with both Jasons narrowly missing each other, going to the same gun store to attempt to purchase firearms for self-defense. So both Jasons can feel intrinsically within themselves that they're nearing the endgame. Both attempt to arm up to defend themselves, but that good old USA legislation stops them, baby. You're going to need to wait 3 days for that background and have a permit and a license. And that ends episode 7 proper, so now we can move into episode 8, Jupiter. Alright, guys, this might be a bit of a stretch, but I think I know what the relation is to the title. But before we discuss it, I think it would actually be better in this circumstance if we go over what happened in the episode and then kind of wrap it up with how I think the title relates to the episode's themes. And before we get into talking about the episode, just even more context. To start off, this is the penultimate episode. It's the second to the finale, so a lot is happening here. Just for cohesion's sake, we're not going to try and follow the episodes like we have been, going A, B, A, B, A, B. We're just going to follow Jason 1 and Jason 2 in their entirety, and they'll overlap whenever it's time. Okay, here we go. We'll begin with Jason 2. He ends up getting attacked by another Jason who made it back to the Prime World. If I'm remembering correctly, Jason 1's house is situated near an overpass metro line, or metro line. So it's a little bit loud, generally, in his alleyway backyard area, and it's obfuscated from the other buildings surrounding it because it has that overhead cover. And while Jason 2 is walking the alley about to throw away some trash or coming back from the storage unit or something, I can't really remember, he gets jumped by one of the Jasons, completely out of the blue too. It's not like he was trying to lose him or duck him, he just starts being attacked by one of the other Jasons. And Jason 2 can get down. I know we've been poking fun at him that he's a manipulator and that he's kind of bitch made inherently, his mental state, he's kind of bitch made. But whenever Jason 2 and the assailant Jason start to fight, it becomes a ground game very quickly, and he just starts bashing his head into the ground, repeatedly over and over on some caveman shit. No time for talking, no time for taunting or goading. It was just started and over that quickly. Jason 2 then has to deal with the aftermath of hiding the body. Can't just have himself be discovered in the alleyway, because I think Jason 2 is that kind of guy where if he did just have to kill this random guy, that he would just say fuck it and leave him there. So long as he worked out mentally that he was going to be alright, he wasn't going to be tied back to it or anything. This then leads to a bit of hijinks between him and Charlie, where he's trying to stuff the body in the trunk in his garage, but Charlie's coming over for whatever reason, and it's like a sitcom moment, but in a weird, twisted way. It's a nice little touch. I enjoy the way that the scene was directed. Fast forward to tomorrow, Charlie's actually going to be touring the Chicago University campus because Charlie's about that age, right? We established he's like a late teens, young adult kind of a vibe. Well, things just continue to get worse and worse for J2. While touring the campus with Charlie, he's noticing conspicuous people following him where he can't really see their face, and he's putting two and two together. This leads to a bit of a cat and mouse game on screen for a bit, and eventually he does manage to get Charlie to go warm up the car or get the car ready or something. Charlie gives pushback because he only has his learner's permit at the time, but, eventually J2 is able to get Charlie away from himself so that he could start getting violent with these guys. Sorry, I'm so amused by it because J2 of all people should know, being like the prime Jason defective, right? If J1 is the prime Jason, J2 is like the prime corruptible Jason, so he knows that they're gonna fucking kill him if he doesn't kill them first. It's like a very Cain and Abel kind of a situation. Anyways, back to the plot. Jason 2 is successful in luring away one of the approaching Jasons into a utility closet or in a staff bathroom or something. They engage in Mortal Kombat, and Jason 2 is victorious, but not without cost. There was no blood price to it or anything like that. He just is a little beat up. If Daniela or Charlie asks about it, he's gonna have to do mental gymnastics to get everything straightened out. After doing the bare minimum, since Jason 2 is kind of aware of the overarching fact that this world is about to implode, he just kind of stuffs the other Jason's body into one of the bathroom stalls and make sure that you can't obviously see it from the outside. Now that he's narrowly avoided catastrophe on multiple fronts, he can now go back to Charlie and Daniela at Jason 1's house. For now, that's where we'll leave Jason 2's plotline, and we'll catch up Jason 1 to where they start to intersect. And Jason 1 is not without his woes. He's also dealing with this whole Jason convergence point within time and space. It's pretty funny, but let's just get into it. We pick up with Jason 1 being spotted by another Jason while he's hanging out in his hotel room. This causes yet another game of cat and mouse between Jason 1 and this unknown Jason that's following him. Eventually, after a good long while has been spent just power walking and mean mugging people through the streets of Chicago, Jason 1 has the bright idea to duck into the Tap. It's the bar that Ryan 1 and Jason 1 went to in the very first episode. It's had some plot relevance, but just insofar as it helps Jason navigate the worlds. But yeah, anyways, he ducks into the Tap, and he meets another Jason inside there, and we're going to refer to this guy as Jason 3 because he does become important. With all the crazy shit going on between Jason and himself, whenever they first see each other, they have a bit of a standoff, but I guess they're willing enough to trust each other that they get past their differences and their apprehensions about one another, and they get to talking over a drink. And we'll put a pin in the plot right here for now, and we're going to take time to really dissect what Jason 1 and Jason 3 end up talking about. Essentially, Jason 3 explains to Jason 1 that while in the regular subjective realities that they all inhabit, they all make decisions that create more worlds via the many worlds interpretation that they themselves are not conscious of or can't even perceive, hence the transcendent reality that they get into whenever they do achieve superposition and become a quantum being. He then goes on to further explain that once you have achieved superposition and you've shed your own subjective reality and you've achieved that transcendent reality, that even when you're in that transcendent reality and you're navigating all the many worlds using your emotions and I guess you could say your subjectless conscious, that even at that point while you're inhabiting the corridor within the box, that all your actions in there create other many worlds in possibly an even higher transcendent reality. Who knows? But it seems to be Matryoshka dolls all the way down. And that shit blew my mind. I never even considered it whenever I was first watching the show. So, in essence, every decision that Jason 1 and Amanda 2 made while they were in the corridor, every time they opened a door, every time they decided whether or not to go into the door, it was already creating many, many, many worlds. And all of these different Jasons all have the same motivation of getting back to the prime Daniela. Yikes, dude. So now you're competing with almost, I would say, I mean, we talked about this before, and I don't really know if it's true. It feels true, but you're essentially dealing with infinite Jasons now, and all of them with varying degrees of personality, what they're willing to do, what they've already done, what they've been through. It's almost impossible to parse. So even if tribalism were to develop in all these competing Jasons, then are you going to trust the ones who their branching point was closer to the end of your journey? How can you even use that as a reliable benchmark? You know, like realistically, anything can happen. It's kind of like almost literally impossible to parse. Yeah, and Jason 3 does end up becoming a big player in the penultimate and finale episode. Basically, he leaves like a badass by just throwing some cash on the table, chugging his beer and saying, look, I'm going to Daniela and Charlie now, and no one's going to stop me, not even me. And he's a little fucked up looking too. Like, he's been through the ringer trying to get back here. Who knows when the branching point was for Jason 3 and Jason 1, but yeah, he does mention to Jason 2 later in the episode that Amanda 2, you know, the Amanda inside of Jason 2's world, the therapist lady, she got pretty early on in their journey. So he's like, you know, he's clearly a lot different. After sitting with the advice that Jason 3 gave him and the revelation that he also helped him to understand, Jason 1 racks his brain about what he can do to get Daniela Prime, Daniela 1, his Daniela, alone with him for long enough that he could convince her that he's the real deal. Because he has to consider a bunch of things, right? How much does she know about what's going on? Does she have any suspicions of me, like the concept of me from her perspective. It's a really nice mind game to see him work out. Eventually, he decides he's just going to get arrested, and he lands on the idea that he's just gonna go into a diner and start smoking a cigar. And whenever the people are like, hey, you can't do that, he's just gonna keep saying no until someone beats him up or he gets trespassed or whatever the fuck happens. And it's really funny to see because he clearly doesn't smoke, and he's smoking the cigar wrong, and he's not having a good time about it, so everyone's already very suspicious, like, what the fuck are you doing, guy? So for his phone call, he's like, I'm gonna call Daniela, obviously, and he knows exactly how to grease her gears so that she comes and gets him. She's big mad, of course. I mean, anyone reasonably would be big mad about that. But yeah, Jason 1 does put the moves on her. He does say all the right things, and she believes him, and she's willing to fucking take violent action against J2 now that she has the drop on him and he has no idea. And this is the point where we could just start talking about the plot holistically, because at this point, it basically becomes merged where all Jasons kind of converge on the same location. So we should be able to speed through this pretty quickly. If I've got the timeline correctly, while all that was happening with Jason 2 and Charlie at Chicago University, Jason 1 was getting arrested and bailed out by Daniela. So Daniela gets home at about the same time as Jason 2 and Charlie, and Jason 2 is now on high alert and basically tells her, hey, pack your shit, we need to go now. I'm not telling you why, like, you gotta trust me. We're gonna figure this out as we go. And Daniela, now armed with the knowledge that this Jason's a fucking imposter, he doesn't know what's going on, I can leverage that to my advantage. She gets the bright idea of saying, oh, well, my luggage, my suitcases and stuff, they're all in the basement. You gotta come to the basement with me to help bring them up because I'm a weak lady, lol. This Jason is just trying to get out as quick as possible, so he takes the bait, which, you know, how is he supposed to know it's bait? And she pushes him down the stairs, like, she fucking puts her back and her legs into it, and this dude clears like 5 stairs and nearly breaks his shit. So he's out cold, it's up for him, and Charlie doesn't know anything at this point because only Daniela went to go bail him out, right? So Charlie's confused, he just saw his fucking mom basically kill his dad, but he trusts her, he's down, he's fucking ride or die, so good for him. They get out, they go to the car, and they zip off, but all hell is breaking loose now. Other Jasons are T-boning Daniela to, like, kidnap her, and all of them have the same one-liner opening, which leads me to believe that their branching point was pretty relatively close to Prime Jason's. So for a good long while, Daniela and Charlie are basically breaking tackles from all the other Jasons. Something will happen, a new Jason will get custody of them, something will happen, and that'll just repeat over and over until eventually they end up at the meeting point that they had with the original Jason 1. And while that is the wrap of the episode, essentially, for, like, plot's sake, I did mention that Jason 3 was going to become a bit of a pivotal role in the plot later, so I'd just like to give him his flowers right now. During episode 8, the one we're currently talking about, he does end up in the house with Jason 2 as he's regaining consciousness, tortures him a little bit, you get insight into what Jason's capable of again, and he ends up somehow, through chance or whatever the hell, he becomes like the pseudo leader of the Jasons trying to get to Daniela. He starts like an online forum for the Jasons where they have debates and they talk about philosophy and theology and stuff. A bunch of them are proposing different things, like having shared custody of Daniela. Others are, like, suggesting battle royale solutions or stuff like that, and it's all very bizarre, but just know that for all the stuff that's about to happen in episode 9 in the finale, it's basically all orchestrated by Jason 3. Not necessarily orchestrated either, it just kind of filters through him. He's like the resounding, unelected voice of the Jasons. And this kind of leads me perfectly into the title topic discussion. Again, a bit of a stretch, but just bear with me on it. So, in Roman mythology, Jupiter was actually one of the major godheads. Most people, whenever they think of ancient, pantheistic, Western-focused gods, they think of the Greek gods. But if we change our perspective a little bit to look at the Roman mythology, Zeus was actually depicted as Jupiter, the king of the gods. Not only that, but culturally, he was considered to be the god of the sky, weather. He held under his sway like judicial processes and the law. He was very much an all-encompassing like force of good. Not only all that, but he was also considered to be the guardian of trust and love, namely in the sanctity of marriage. So it's almost like the show writers are giving a little head nod toward the power of love, marriage, and trust being the one thing you could rely on in the entire eminence of the universe. Or dare I even say universes. Anyways, a little tinfoil hat media analysis aside, that is episode 8 wrapped. So we can move on to episode 9, Entanglement, the finale. Okay, guys, here we go. So Jason 1, Charlie, and Daniela 1 are officially on the run. The only things that they have are like one carry-on bag that they're all able to scrounge together in the midst of all the Jason handovers they went through. Jason and Daniela put together that they can't use any of their debit or credit cards because of the risk of it being tracked. Not only that, they're limited to whatever cash they have on them because if they make a withdrawal, it's the same thing. They've got maybe 3/4 tank on Blair's car that they basically pressured her into letting them borrow in the midst of all the chaos. And the cherry on top is that wherever Jason thinks he can hide, they're going to be able to find eventually because they're just him. And potentially anywhere that Daniela can think to hide either, because that's like their whole point of existence. So ultimately, Jason and Daniela defer to Charlie as to where they can hide. And this is where Charlie shines, baby. Remember that guy who was stealing Charlie's bitch way earlier in the show? Remember how I said he was wealthy as a mug? Well, Charlie's gonna take it as recompense that he could just crash one of his summer homes. And it's perfect when you think about it, because if any of the other Jasons had a family structure similar to Jason Prime, Charlie is as removed from Jason and Daniela as you can, conceptually speaking. Like, technically, they could still be together and not have Charlie at all. So the fact that there could be multiple Charlies, there's no through line that could even suggest that they would be remotely similar, unless you really ascribe to like the whole nature argumentation of like heritability or whatever. So as far as they're concerned, they've reached the perfect hiding place. The family take precautionary measures to protect themselves as well as they can for the worst case scenario. For example, Jason 1 finds the best improvised bludgeoning weapon he can find, and they suggest that everyone sleep at least close, not in the same room, because you know Daniela's trying to fuck. I'm kidding. I'm not, but I don't mean to be crass about it. Like, Daniela and Jason basically have had the most intimate, intense, traumatic experience they could possibly ever have. And you know what they say, sex solves everything. So they do the deed off camera because, you know, they already hooked you with the sex in episode 1. They don't need to show it again. Afterwards, they have a very nice, intimate pillow talk moment where it's just really well done. Obviously, I don't remember what was said or how it was delivered or even the cinematography, but the impression that I have when recalling this part of the story is that it felt complete. Not necessarily because of the hookup, but because of the moment they got to share after. You really get to sit with the characters and enjoy their moment of closure, knowing that even if they do get murdered by some random fucking Jason, they got to be together again. But yeah, after they do the nasty, I'm sorry, okay. But yeah, after the fact, Jason still needs to go on guard duty or something. I forget what it is exactly, but he ends up on his laptop trying to stay awake. It is at this point where he checks his email for whatever cosmic reason, maybe an old habit where he's just kind of zoning out and he's pressing stuff. And he finds a hyperlink provided by one of the Jasons as an invite to the weird, like, Reddit 4chan pseudo message board that they have. And the other Jasons are fucking tripping, dude. Like I said before, they're just talking a bunch of nonsense, trying to cope hard, and he leaves the laptop open on that message board. That is important for later. Just, you know, it is what it is. Jason eventually falls asleep on guard duty, and he wakes up as the sun's rising and as the birds are starting to sing, and he probably only gets like a couple winks of sleep. Like, if I had to guesstimate, he probably got like maybe 4 hours. And the day that they get to have together is really touching and wholesome. Not in any particular way that stands out, but just because of how plain and normal and default you could say it is. They have a regular American spread breakfast. They got pancakes, some bacon, eggs, you know, just a regular Saturday morning breakfast that you'd probably everyone has, and everyone has a special place in their heart for. The day is essentially spent with Charlie, Daniela, and Jason just hanging out on the beach because it's a lake beach house. You know, like some lakes have beaches, others don't. This lake has a beach, and they're just hanging out on the beach together. And Jason and Daniela are just shooting the shit about his journey. They're being very like touch and go, very lighthearted about it, because clearly this shit is fucking bananas. Like, really consider that you found out that your partner had been some imposter this whole time, the betrayal you would feel, the exhilaration you would feel being back with your true partner, having to really wrap your mind around the fact that there are other places that your partner has been, places you can't even conceive perceptually at a fundamental level, and you're trying to be there and be this emotional support pillar for them when there's really no way you can relate to what's going on with them. All this comes to a head whenever Jason reveals to Daniela that there's this forum site that they all are on, that it's just crazy to him that there's so many of them. There's like over 100 of them, and there's only going to be more coming in. Well, eventually as the day goes on, Daniela looks for an opportunity to get a hold of this laptop and then go onto this forum site. She plans to send out basically like a CC'd email to everybody where she says, I choose Jason 1 and fuck everybody else, deal with it, sucks to suck. This is my life, I've had it for a long time now, and I don't want to trade up. She does eventually succeed and sends out this email, and it basically leads to an all-out rush to get to them. I can't remember what exact plot device they decided to go with narratively, whether it was like an IT Jason or what it was, but they end up finding where they are. Directly because Daniela decided to be courageous and take this into her own hands and set the record straight and basically try to take control of the situation. Like I said before, all of this culminates in a giant clusterfuck of Jasons basically storming the house, killing each other, and trying to get to Daniela. One thing leads to another, and Jason 2 ends up saving Jason 1 and his family from one of the other Jasons, and basically tells him, I got everything ready in my car for you, I'll escort you out, we need to get you out of here. We find out later, after the escape has already successfully occurred, via audio message, that Jason 2 ultimately regrets what he did, not necessarily in having discovered the superposition consciousness relocation box technology, but in trying to usurp Jason 1's life. And he's basically trying to repent for what he's done by putting them all in a better position via more IV ampules to travel using the box and basic living necessities for their travels within the box. He basically wants them to find a brand new world because he fucked theirs up real bad. And I'm not going to hold you guys. This was very moving for me. I really enjoyed the speech. I felt like it was a good wrap up to the themes and the narrative payoff of the series at large. I'm not ashamed to admit that I did tear up a little bit. I mean, of course, like I've been reiterating throughout this whole review, that it's natural to wonder what could have been. Not to live with regret, but just to know that things could have been different. And to just imagine really discovering a whole new branch of science, developing the technology in multiple fields to achieve it, and then achieving your dream, but by betraying a fundamental aspect of who you are to do it. It's so good, dude. So yeah, they hear about all this on the drive to the box because Jason 1 knows where it is. Like, he wasn't too drunk to know where the box is. He was just led there at gunpoint. So yeah, When they get there, they actually find a lot, like over 100 Jasons there, just kind of guarding the box. There's dissenting opinions between them all. Obviously, Jason 1 and his family approach with trepidation because they don't really know what's going to happen. However, through groupthink and collective opinion, they do decide, they being all the Jasons, they do decide to just let them go and find a new life because Daniela decided. And they all respect Daniela's wishes because they wish they could be with Daniela. So the mob of Jasons let them through, and Jason 1 takes them through the proper procedures and mental prep of navigating the corridor in the box. Meanwhile, we see Amanda in the perfect Chicago get approached by Ryan, or at least that world's Ryan, and perhaps maybe they had some kind of existing relationship, or maybe that world's box was already operational, because he approaches her and just starts talking about the compound, the IV drug. So that's weird. Why was that Amanda missing? Who knows? We also get a glimpse of Leighton, J1's Leighton at least, taking another shot of the drug and then getting ready to go party into another world. So who knows? I really hope Amazon isn't planning on continuing this story, because as far as I know, season 1 wraps up the book in its entirety. If they want to do a whole Full Metal Alchemist thing where they go ahead of the source material and do their own thing, I am interested in seeing what they'll do for it, but I'm not very optimistic on the execution. And unfortunately, as anticlimactic and closed off and not vague as the ending is, like the ending for me, if they just stuck to the source material and didn't do this weird angling for a possible IP launch franchise thing, the ambiguity of the ending with just Jason 1 and his family going into the box would have worked. It's that tacked on other things of our primary cast in other worlds having otherworldly, like multiversal, like potential interconnectedness sprinkled in that really bugs me. And that's the ending. But corny tacked on things aside, I really did enjoy the ending. And yeah, guys, that concludes the analysis portion of the show, and we can move on to the review portion. So one thing I will give Dark Matter credit for is being able to pull off a space-time, bootstrapping, paradox, anomaly kind of a story that doesn't feel shoehorned in with the interpersonal drama. Just as a quick example, something like Steins Gate or Back to the Future, a lot of the character drama kind of stems from the main character being removed from the normative or expected social setting that they'd be able to inhabit and clear up any misunderstandings from easily. Like with Back to the Future, for example, they're worried about altering the timeline or whatever the hell. And in Steins Gate's case, he is just not believed because he's the only one seeing these differences as he moves throughout the multiverse. People just have to inherently trust that he's making the right decisions because he's the only one who could see the result of his actions. These typical problems within the subgenre space are removed by just avoiding them entirely, which, as a fan of sci-fi and this genre in particular, I really appreciate. On a separate note, I really enjoyed the acting done in the show. Now, I'm not one of those kinds of guys where the acting can make or break a concept for me. In fact, usually it's quite the opposite. I will kind of excuse or not be bothered by what people would consider, quote, subpar performance. But I found that the actual acting in this show was done so well that I completely got lost in most episodes. And of course, above all else, the concept itself is so well executed, not only from a sci-fi perspective, but in a cinematic and narrative way that it really adds impact and depth to the philosophy and theology and even the ontology of the show. Like, this show really examines what it means for you to have selfhood, for you to have an identity, if fate or destiny or predestination is a thing. Like, it's very well done. I'm sure the book is fantastic. I might even check it out, but I probably won't review it. Dark Matter has kept me engaged from start to finish. I highly recommend it. I preach the gospel of it. Anytime anyone asks me for a recommendation in the sphere, I will always go for Dark Matter. All in all, I give Dark Matter a solid flat 9 out of 10. I do think it's better than The Expanse Season 1. I think it executes perfectly, but I think it also has the grace of being a one-shot book, one season adaptation, unless Amazon wants to fuck the goat. And that concludes the show, guys. Let me know what you thought. Let me know if you've seen Dark Matter, what you thought of it, what your major impact was on your viewing experience, what you really enjoyed about it, what stood out to you. Did you have a different take than mine? Did you think my philosophy was shit? Please let me know. I'm always looking to talk about the shows I like to talk about. It's the whole point of the show. Follow me on my socials. You could find me on X, Twitter, at Effective Media. The username should be The Effective Media Show. You could find me on TikTok under the same name, The Effective Media Show, as well as YouTube and Spotify. I'm just covering all my bases because I don't know where you're listening to me from. Let me know where you're listening to me at. Also, tail end trailer announcement, I'm planning to upload every 14 days at a maximum. My aimed goal, my ideal hyper-optimized goal is every 9 days to hit that 3 a month sweet spot, but at least twice a month, so stay tuned for that. I'll tweet it out. Anyways, that's the show. I hope to see you in the next one, and take care of yourself.